Welcome to the Licensing and Games podcast from Leia. My name's Mitch. I'm with Ratchet, and today we're really excited to be speaking with AJ Grand-Scrutton. For the past 10 years, AJ has been the CEO of Dlala Studios, which is an indie game studio that he also founded. Prior to that, AJ was working for the creator of one of my favorite games, which is RuneScape, and that's, of course, Jagex. And Dlala is no stranger to working with licensed IP. They've created a game called Disney Illusion Island and also worked with the famous Battletoads IP. So today, AJ is going to be talking to us about some of his motivations for working with IP and some best practices for acquiring an IP license. Thanks for chatting with us, AJ.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Like I said in the intro, you've created 2 IP-based games. You're no stranger to working with IP. So maybe you could just start with a bit of an intro about your studio, Dlala Studios, and a little bit about the games that you've created so far.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we formed Dlala in 2012. So it was originally myself and my co-founder, Craig Thomas. We both worked together at Jagex, and then I took him over with me when I went to Bossa Studios. And it got to a point at Bossa where it felt right to leave. So we had a chat, and we were like, well, at the time we had no mortgage and no kids. So we were like, look, why don't we just, if we're going to ever do this, let's do it now. And 2012, you might remember, was almost like, it was just after the peak of the indie game movement. So, the indie game movement had been building for years. We'd had the stuff like Braid and Super Meat Boy. And I think Indie Game, the movie, had not long come out, which was very influential in the decision. And we formed this studio, and it was very cliche. It was, me out my mum's garage, Craig working from his girlfriend's mum's spare bedroom. We had roughly £3,000 between the two of us, and no plan. So there wasn't a game idea or any plan. It was just like, hey, we're 2 dudes that love working together. Let's do this thing. And over the last 10 years, it's been absolutely insane. We're now I think we're just about to hire our 37th full-time employee. We did some original stuff early on in our career. But really our big stuff is we did Battletoads, as you mentioned, in 2020. And we're doing Disney Illusion Island now, which is a Mickey, Minnie, Donald and Goofy game. Alongside that, we've also helped other studios out. So before Battletoads, we worked with Rare on Sea of Thieves. So we worked on Sea of Thieves for about 6 months before that came out. Yeah, and it's just been this amazing roller coaster, to be honest. I don't think either of us ever predicted. Craig left the studio a few years ago and then came back last year. It's just been this wonderful thing where, we have this big phrase on our wall, and it's very cheesy, but it's very true. And the whole mantra of Dlala Studios is, make games we love for people to love with people we love. That's the whole point. We want to just make, we spent the first few years of our career not necessarily making games we were passionate about, or not necessarily working with people who we got on that well with. And so we founded the studio just on this mentality of let's only work with people we like. Let's only work with people we like, and let's only make stuff that we really want to make. If we want to make money, we might as well quit games and go, be programmers in the finance industry. So, if we're going to do this, if we're going to sacrifice a lot of ourselves, we might as well do it for stuff we're passionate about.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a beautiful philosophy, and I'm sure, in terms of building a team and even, coming to work every day, that's got to make it easier. And congrats on all the growth. And I guess the story today, it almost sounds like one of those classic founder entrepreneurial stories where it's like, hey, if this is the time we're going to try and do something, this is when we're going to do it, and kind of naturally forces you to grow in the way that you've grown. So appreciate you sharing that story there. I'm keen to dig into the backstory to Disney Illusion Island a little bit. I know online, and I think you've spoken about it previously, sounds like it kind of started cooking up around 2016 or maybe in the past. And I don't know if it's the same game or separate, but I'd love to hear, when did you first start working on it? What was the backstory? And were there any learnings from that experience over time to kind of where you're at now with Illusion Island?
Yeah, definitely. So Yeah, so we were working with Disney, and we were working on a Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and Goofy game in 2015. It wasn't the same game. So there's the only thing in common between the two games was that they were both 2D platform based, and they starred Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and Goofy. There's no similarities, or even the character design and art style are completely different from this one. But yeah, I mean, that was insane. Like, we in 2015 when we signed that Disney deal, that was a meaty deal. We were 6 of us, and we had literally just moved out of the garage. And when I mean literally, we moved into the Dlala, what is now Dlala HQ. We had no desks, we had no chairs. We'd only just put power in the building because it was a dance studio for 10 years when we took it over. So we designed it. We just put power. We were all sitting on the floor with our rigs. And that is the state we were in as we finished our previous game overall and started the game in 2015. And yeah, the way that came about, and he'll never let me forget this. So we're the very pretentious sounding thing of we've got an agent. So we're signed to an agency out in America. We're signed to Creative Artists Agency. And our agent, Derek, is a long-time friend. We've been with them now since 2014. Like they signed us when we were no ones in the garage. Like literally no one had ever heard of us, and they took a gamble on us. So I flew out to DICE in Las Vegas, right? I flew out to DICE in January 2015. And I had 33 meetings in 3 days. So CA had booked me 33 meetings in 3 days, and we were pitching an original concept at the time. And out of all 33 meetings, there was one meeting that I turned to Derek and I said, I think it'd be a waste of time for me to go to this meeting. And he said, no, you said you'd go to every meeting that I booked you. I said, yeah, but they're not going to be interested in us. We're not a good fit. Like, I just don't think it's worth going. So that was Disney. So he forced me to go to that meeting. And that was the only bite we got. And it was the only bite we cared about at that point in the end. So, like, the meeting with Disney went really well. They asked if I could fly to Los Angeles while I was in the States. So I flew out to LA like 2 days later. And then the next thing you know, we were going and we were suddenly making this Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and Goofy game. And it was incredible and it was amazing. And we got to work with this great IP and stuff. But, in 2016, Disney had a change of direction. They decided they no longer wanted to be a publisher. They were moving into licensing. And it meant that we just got kind of caught up in that and our project got cancelled. And I can say it now, best thing that ever happened to us. Best thing that ever happened to us was that project getting cancelled. We were not ready. Like, we were not ready. And we didn't feel it back then. Like, it wasn't like oh my God, we've signed this and we can't do it. But looking back in retrospect, we just weren't ready. Like, there's no way we would have been ready to make Illusion Island if we hadn't made Battletoads. Like, that's the easiest way I can put it to you guys. Like, we were trying to make that first Mickey game with, what would it have been? 12 full-time staff and 5 contractors. I mean, it was a small team. We didn't really know what we were doing. We'd made games. We all knew how to make games. There wasn't any problem with that side of things. And the team's incredibly talented, but we just hadn't been through enough. We hadn't grown enough as individuals. We hadn't grown enough as a team. And so whilst it was heartbreaking, it was 100% the best thing that ever happened because it meant we got more experience. We worked on some of our own stuff to kind of improve our tools. We then did, Sea of Thieves, which is amazing to be a part of. That led to Battletoads, which was an absolute, literally dream come true. And so it meant when the conversation came back around, when was it? We started talking to Disney again around 2019. Like, we were ready. Like, I was so confident. I knew we could make this game. Like, even before I fully knew what this game was, I knew we could make it. And I look at what we're making now, and I'm playing it. I'm playing the full thing at the moment, end to end on loop, just to review it. And I'm like, this is 100 times better than anything we could have ever made 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's a cool learning that you kind of like had to create another IP based game that like the stakes are still really high, but it's not Disney, right? And that gave you the confidence that you needed to go and create Illusion Island. So yeah, that's really cool. I guess my next question, and maybe it's a little bit cynical for me to say, but sometimes feels like the motivations behind IP-based games these days can be a little bit too commercial in nature. And when I had a look at your website, like that's clearly not the case for you and your team. When I read the article from in games industry recently, it's obvious that you guys have a passion for these IPs. So I'm curious as to like what was the motivation to work with licensed IP originally, other than chance meetings at DICE that you didn't want to go to, and why these IPs in particular? Why Battletoads? Why Disney?
Yeah, so when we started the studio, zero interest in licensed stuff. I mean, you guys know, right? Like, this is your area of expertise. You think in 2012, connotations around licensed stuff in 2012 were not great, right? We'd seen the kind of THQ tanking, kids market stuff had happened. So yeah, like we'd never really thought about it. We were just like, you know what? We loved Earthworm Jim. We loved all those games. We just wanted to make IP like that people loved. When we pitched to Disney, we were pitching in 2015 an original concept. They were the ones that then turned around and went, "Hey, look, you know, we've not been able to do anything with Mickey for a while in games. It's landed, you know, Epic Mickey was the last stuff. Would you guys be interested in that?" And we got that. We love Disney, like we love Disney stuff, right? You know, it's not a gimmick, like. I mean, It's literally, my office is full of it. Like, right, I mean, just on my desk alone, I can literally pull out, I've got one Mickey here, I've got Oswald over here, like, I've got my Mickey director here, like, you know. And so when, you know, whoever in their right mind, you know, we're 2.5 years, 3 years into our life as a studio, right? I'm, at this point in 2015, I am, 4, 5, 6 years into my career. Why would it ever have crossed my mind that Disney would give me Mickey Mouse? Why would Disney give 6 dudes in Essex Mickey Mouse, right? So the only time I'd ever considered anything licensed, and it wasn't even really licensed, was Battletoads, ironically. So first bit of public speaking I ever did was the year we formed. It was 2012, and I was doing a talk about making Janksy, our very first game. And this guy comes up to me while I'm talking to some other people and he says, "Hey, look, I know you're busy. Let me know if you want to chat." And he hands me a card, and it's Craig Duncan, the studio head of Rare. And I'm looking at the card and I'm like, is this Rare? Like, and we just formed a really great friendship almost instantly, chatting about grunge music and stuff. And so what followed was, you know, every time I'd hang out with Craig, I'd always be like, "Can I have Battletoads? Can I have Battletoads?" So from 2012, I was asking for Battletoads, right? We get to 2015, I've still not got Battletoads, but suddenly I'm getting offered Mickey. And so yeah, like we just started making a Mickey Mouse game. And the great thing is like, I mean, I've got it out. There you go. It feels like I'm set up here. And if you saw my desk, you'd know I'm not. So like, this is my childhood copy, right, of Castle of Illusion and Quackshot. I still don't understand why all my Mega Drive games are in such good condition. But like, we love these games. My best friend Mark, who's my IT director here, like, when we were kids at school, we used to replay World of Illusions every year. So getting a chance to make a spiritual successor was an absolute no-brainer. I could not give a flying crap about the money side, right? Like, all I have ever cared about is that I can pay my staff well, that we are safe, we're secure, and we're doing something we love. So it was never a cash grab for us. I mean, God, I can't even remember what percentage of back end we would have even had on that first deal. Probably minimal, if anything. So yeah, it was really like coincidence. It was just, you know, an off chance meeting and somebody saying to me, "Hey, like, do you want Mickey Mouse?" And being a lifelong Mickey Mouse fan, I was like, yes. Like, why would I? Who would say no to that question?
Off that, I guess I've got like two questions that kind of like come out of that. Like, what made them do that? I guess, like, I mean, it sounds like it was almost surprising. And like, did you pitch to them? Was there something that you did? Like, did you talk about your passion for the Disney universe and Mickey that got them excited, or like, which way did it go? And the reason I ask is I know that you've previously spoken about kind of like a pre-pitch checklist on approaching IP holders. Like, and part of that is, you know, only pitch for IP you love. Was that part of this, or did something else affect it? And you know, what was important here to make this kind of deal come about at the time? Because it does sound surprising, right? Unless it was just they were impressed by the garage that you were moving into. But I think that's not it.
Yeah, look, the whole, the talk I did the other day when I spoke about good ways to pitch for IP, like AJ 2015 didn't know any of that stuff. Like AJ, I did not know any of that, right? So that was none of that. It was, we pitched him this original concept. I'm trying to even remember what one it was. And we spoke about our old games, and we spoke about Overruled. So Overruled was our very first proper game we made, right? And we call it like one of the ugliest games ever made, but we loved that game. But the core concept of Overruled was the fact we wanted to take a brawler, which we did a really bad job of, ironic because we ended up making Battletoads, and combine it with something like the card game Flux. And what we loved about that was like the rules are always changing, but the players control the rule changes.
Right.
And so Overruled ended up this weird brawler where like you picked up cards and you played them as you were playing, and you could suddenly be in a death match and you'd play this card and it'd be capture the flag, or you'd play another card and it'd be a swag bag, and it was this weird dynamically always changing game. And we spoke about that with Disney. Like they just wanted to chat, like talk about, we love this pitch, but it might not be right for us. Can you tell us about you? And that clicked with them because I think they had internally been having this thing where they were like, oh, wouldn't it be great to have like a really weird dynamic shifting world for a Mickey experience? And so that was kind of almost pure coincidence. And I think like it resonated with who I was speaking to so much so that they wanted us to fly to LA to meet this executive producer. And so I flew to Los Angeles to have a Indian meal with a producer from England who lived in America, right?
Of course.
And we just got on really well. It was a great conversation. I think the dinner must have lasted 3 or 4 hours, and we're just chatting about games, about like how we approach games, what who we are and what we want to do. And that's when they were like, look, we want to do something interesting with Mickey. We don't want to do it AAA. We don't want to go to a big studio. We think you guys would be an interesting fit for it. Would you be interested? And so that's kind of how it initially came about. They said like what we had done and what we spoke about was, kind of fit with where they wanted to go philosophy-wise in 2015. And a lot of the stuff I talk about, only pitching what you're passionate on, where that helped in that situation was when we did the formal pitch. So when we did the formal pitch to go from pre-production to production in 2015, that was really where the first signs of that really would have shown. Like, I think if you look back through even my early Battletoads decks, I don't think they're reflective of kind of what I was saying. I think, I was trying to give Rare and Craig what I thought they wanted rather than what I felt about the product. And I think you can see kind of the early kind of moving towards what we now have as our pitching philosophy as we were doing the production pitch for the 2015 game. So yeah, it wasn't like I didn't actively go looking for Mickey. I didn't actively go. I actively tried to get out of the Disney meeting. Like genuinely, I tried to get out of the Disney meeting originally. And we just got on well, and it was nice. And because, I think it's important to remember, like Disney had done a lot of big budget games, right? They did Epic Mickey, then they bought the studio and they built Epic Mickey 2. And, I think they wanted, like, what does a smaller Mickey title look like? What does a Mickey title look like through the lens of just a small creative studio? And so, yeah, like most of Dlala's entire history, right time, right place, and it just aligned.
Yeah, that's cool. It's great to hear like the kind of, I guess it's refreshing to hear that the IP wanted to take a different approach as well and not just go to a Triple H studio. So sounds like things lined up really well. So in the article, and for anyone who's not aware of the article we're talking about, AJ was gave a talk recently, right, where that ended up being a games industry biz article. And you talk about like 3 things that go into a pitch that, when you're pitching, like what you should be trying to accomplish, which is show an awesome idea, show an awesome team, and show an awesome knowledge of the IP. I think those are 3 really interesting kind of topics. So can you break down a little bit what goes into each of those, and then maybe some best practices for any game developers who are aspiring to work with IP?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you reminded me what those 3 points were because I couldn't remember how I worded them. Yeah, I mean, look, the awesome idea. This is the bit I kind of mentioned in my talk. This is the no-brainer that I can't really help you with, right? This is the one where, like, if you don't have this, then there's no point doing anything else. Don't bother even trying. Most legitimately good IP holders and licensors want to make something awesome with their IP because it devalues the IP if you don't, right? So you just got to have a really cool, strong concept. And this isn't necessarily what everyone says, but like there's this almost myth that you have to have something brand new and completely original. And I don't think that's true. And that's not me saying that I make derivative games. But let's be honest, games have been around for much longer than any of us have now. So it's very hard to not do something which is relatable to other ideas. And in fact, most publishers want you to relate your game pitches to other ideas, right? You know, the common thing you have is a razor slide, which is 3 titles that you can point to and say, hey, we've got, you know, we're taking influence from, you know, I think I showed the Battletoad slide, right? And that one was God of War for like the free-flowing set pieces jumping between. And it had the original Battletoads, which obviously is an influence on the Battletoads pitch. So, like, you have to show 3 titles that, and usually at least 2 of them have to be very successful. There's no point pitching obscure indie stuff for 3 of them because then the publisher goes, Google, oh, great, 100,000 units, which is an amazing amount of sales. But to a publisher, they're like, well, that's only going to get me a 1.75 return on my investment. Why would I bother doing that? But, like, so it's not about being necessarily fully original. It's about having something awesome. So if you've got this awesome idea, which is even an amalgamation of stuff you've loved, like that's a great starting point. And then you have to demonstrate it. Explain that idea and explain it in a way that people that don't know games will understand. Like there's no point going in there using insider terms and trying to look really clever because the people that sign off on the IP might know nothing about games. Like Battletoads, I knew I was pitching to a game company, so not necessarily a concern. Even Mickey, right? Like Mickey was Disney Games, but still, at some point, we had to put together some materials for people who were part of wider Disney that aren't in the games division. So make sure you can explain what your game is to people that don't know anything about games. But yeah, I can't really help with the awesome idea part. The awesome team. So this is really 2 parts this really breaks into for me. Why this team and why now? That's what this bit comes down to, right? So what is the opportunity currently? And this is something really that was drilled into me by Craig Duncan when I was pitching on Battletoads. Like Craig was like, look, you know, we're not just pitching this to Rare to sign off, we're pitching this to Phil Spencer. Like Phil Spencer who signs the checks for Halo, for Gears of War, right? So why does it make sense for Phil Spencer to revigorate a quarter of a century old IP that hasn't done anything? So that was about talking about the opportunity. So with Battletoads, you know, the stuff I spoke about there was like, hey, like, you know, this irreverent, like fourth wall breaking humor is really popular right now. You look at Deadpool, you look at Rick and Morty, like it's a really great position for that type of humor. Battletoads had a lot of cult following. The whole GameStop meme, all of this stuff, it showed it stayed relevant. We also knew it performed really well on Rare Replay, you know, so like that was kind of the opportunity, the why now. But then why this team? Okay, well, look, the part of why this team breaks down to this. Show why your team is awesome. And to show why your team is awesome, that doesn't necessarily mean show the stuff you have done together as a team. Show that if you've got it, right? If you've got an amazing track record as a team, show those games off. But also, what have your team done as individuals? Like, we've got Eric Giacona, right, who is our animation director. Eric's first job was working on Earthworm Jim. So he worked on Earthworm Jim 1, he worked on Earthworm Jim 2, he then worked on the Neverhood stuff. He then had this amazing career where he did stuff like Marvel games and he was jumping between 2D and 3D. Like Eric is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best animator in the industry. So I shove his whole CV in there, right? Like, look, we're pitching you a 2D hand-drawn game. This dude worked on some of the best-looking games to date that was 2D hand-drawn. And then show what the other team members have done, right? I was working with one of my studios that I mentor, and they were really worried because as a team, they'd specifically done original IPs that were awesome, but they were pitching for licensed stuff. But as individuals, those guys had worked on like the Lego games and things like this. And I was like, that is gold. Like, put that stuff in there. So that's the technical side. Show why you are the right team for this project. Then also explain why you want to do this. Like for me, the big obvious slide I put into any pitch I do for an IP is I put a big heart and I put the Dlala logo and then I put the logo of the game. Because we're only pitching on stuff we're fans of. So what better reason to give us the game than the fact that we're an awesome studio who absolutely loves this IP. You'll find there's a lot of awesome studios, right? There's a lot of awesome studios, and there is a lot of people that love this IP, but is there a big crossover? How does that Venn diagram actually sit? So making it very clear that you love the IP and you are the right team for the job is super important. And then what was my last point? What was the last one? It was an awesome idea, awesome team, and then...
Awesome idea, awesome team, and awesome knowledge of the IP.
Awesome knowledge of the IP. How ironic that I forget the knowledge one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this in that talk. And this is very much a me thing, but the reason I think this is important is that everyone should understand that, like, all these big licensed titles we work on, we've never made a prototype for. We've signed these on the back of pitches, right? So this is a big part of that for me, is that because it's only stuff I love, I can just immerse myself in it fully. So, like, I mean, I've got a bookshelf full of Mickey and Disney books over here that I read God knows how many books. I rewatched every single short that Mickey was basically in. Like, I just reabsorbed all this Mickey stuff because what I really believe is that when you get given an IP, you become a gatekeeper. You may not be the gatekeeper, you're not the final sign-off, but you are in charge of this version of this character, right? Like, you know, there's a lot of controversy of all the stuff I did with Battletoads in terms of like what I did with the Dark Queen and stuff like that. But Rare trusted me to be the gatekeeper for those characters. And so they were my decisions to make. And that is how I felt about Mickey and Friends for Illusion Island. It's, you know, if I'm the gatekeeper, I need to know. Like, if my team come to me and they're like, "Oh, we were thinking of doing this," and the answer is no. Like, if the answer is no from an IP perspective, I need to be able to eloquently explain to them why. Like, "Oh, Mickey wouldn't do this because," or like, "Oh, that's great, like, but Minnie doesn't actually talk like this for this reason." And so it meant, like, I have to know that stuff, and I have to know that stuff at pitch level. Like, for me to feel confident, I want to walk into a room, and I've never had an IP holder test me. Do you know what I mean? I've never had them go, "Okay, AJ, so everyone knows that Steamboat Willie came out in 1928, but do you know when?" And then start giving me random pop quizzes. But, like, if you're going to talk passionately about something, being able to back that up with a really sturdy knowledge is just what a great weapon to have in your arsenal, right? Like, I can give these references. I can talk about, you know, the stuff we've taken from, like, the new Wonderful World of Mickey stuff, or the stuff that really harks all the way back to, you know, the early stuff like Through the Mirror, Plain Crazy, all those early cartoons, and, you know, why the stuff in the middle didn't necessarily sit right for me for what we're doing because it appealed to a different audience. So yeah, like, I truly believe that you need to do homework. You need to put the time in, like, and if you're not willing to do that, then there's just no point doing it, because you need that knowledge to make the game. Because we've all played bad licensed titles, and yeah, let's be honest, 9 times out of 10, a lot of them are bad because they get given 8 months to make it to hit a movie date. That was the old way, right? But also there are those 1 out of 10 times where it's bad because someone just shoved the IP as a skin on top of what they were already doing. Like you said, it was a cash grab and they didn't really care about the IP. So, like, you play it and you're instantly like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, this character probably wouldn't do that. Like, what I know about this character says they wouldn't do this." So yeah, I just think it's really important to really just know as much as you possibly can early on. And also, it will tell you very quickly. Like, if you struggle to sit there and spend a weekend absorbing this stuff, then how are you going to spend the next 2 years of your life making the game about it?
For sure. And, like, I think, like you said, it's a big responsibility, right? You know, being the gatekeeper of the IP. And I think, like, that's probably one of the big things that an IP owner looks for as well, right? Is, like, does this person know their stuff, and are they going to take good care of not just the character, but, like, the whole universe and the story as well? So, and just on the like the best practices or the guide, I noticed, like, there wasn't anything in there about demonstrating the possible commercial upside or doing a revenue forecast or any kind of like the functional stuff that you tend to see in other IP licensing guides. So I'm curious, like, do you think that if you demonstrate an awesome idea, awesome team, awesome knowledge of the IP, the commercial discussions just kind of take care of themselves?
So, as always, the disclaimer I always give is I am talking from my experience, what has worked for us.
Sure.
Why would I tell Disney how commercial Mickey Mouse is? Why would I tell Rare how commercial Battletoads is? Where am I going to derive the information on that IP? Well, really, the only place you can properly get that is from the IP holder. Otherwise, what you're actually doing is you're doing pretty generic market research, right? And you're going, hey, it's kind of like these games did these numbers, right? Where, like, that is a conversation, in my opinion, and this is what I always say to a partner, this is a conversation that we should have. This is a conversation that Dlala, the licensor, or Dlala, the licensor and publisher, depending on the setup, this is a conversation we should have, but, like, they know how commercial their properties are, right? Like, really, the time you need that info is when you go into a third party. If you then go into a publisher to justify it, that's something you and the licensor should work with. And I think if the IP holder isn't necessarily willing to do that or divulge that information, it's probably a bit of a red flag, to be honest. You know, I'd never in a million years ask Disney for the numbers for Mickey, right? I'd never in a million years be like, can you just give me the commercial breakdowns for Mickey Mouse? But I also have faith that, like, if we were going to someone else to raise some funding, that Disney would do everything they could to make it happen if they wanted it to happen. And they would explain why it's commercially aligned, etc. So, yeah, I never put that stuff in the deck because all I'm really doing is guessing. Let's be honest. Like, that's all I'm doing. I'm guessing or I'm deriving it from other things. The closest I will probably do is sometimes in the opportunity, I will go like... so I'm trying to think of a good example of one of our pitches. So let's assume I'm doing a 4-quadrant, a family-friendly title, right? Like, easy justification for that a few years ago was to go, hey, like, you know, look at Nintendo. Mario is doing really well again. Sonic is coming back and doing really well. Classic IP that has a family reach is doing well. Here's some great examples of titles. But that's really as far as my commercial deep dive would go with it because my expectation is if I'm talking to an IP holder and I'm trying to pitch on something that is not really that commercially viable, they'll probably tell me pretty quickly because they're not going to want to waste their own time.
Right. I mean, if you demonstrate all those things, it should be pretty obvious that you're going to make a successful game, right? So, yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, because that's what we bring. What we bring is an awesome game. We don't bring a deep dive commercial knowledge. In fact, you know, well, in a month's time we will have, but we've never had a marketing person in-house. We've just made our first marketing hire that starts on December 1st. So, yeah, like I just think that is their conversations I think an IP holder or licensor should be hopefully willing to have with you.
Yeah. I guess the flip of that is, you know, if your job is not necessarily as much around the commercial side of things, I think you mentioned a couple of things previously with, you know, you had to kind of talk about the benefit of how do we bring Battletoads back, you know, this kind of IP that's been kind of less active over the last few years, or even as you mentioned with Disney and how they wanted to kind of work with not a AAA at the time. I guess the question I'm interested there is, you know, like, how do you show the licensor the benefits that you might have for the IP that are potentially not, you know, just evident in dollars or figures, you know, like as part of your proposals, like, or, you know, how would you recommend other studios to illustrate to kind of IP holders that, you know, this is what we're going to do for that IP. This is how it might land for the audience or the fans or like the benefits that they might receive in that regard.
Yeah. A really awesome deck, like a really awesome deck. And it doesn't have to be the most beautiful deck in the world. But like your pitch has to be on point. Like your pitch has to be captivating. You're telling a story. Like every good pitch, and this is what I always work. Any of my like mentees, this is what I always work with them on, right? Your pitch deck is you telling a story. You are selling a story to the person you are pitching to. If you can't captivate your audience at that level, then that doesn't look good for you to captivate an audience when you're making the game, right? So it's hard because I'm very lucky. I think I inherited the gift of gab from my dad. Like, my dad has always been a wonderful talker in terms of, like, we'd walk in to buy something and we'd walk out with 3 freebies as well as the thing he bought. Like, and I think that's definitely helped me a lot with this. So I know I'm lucky, but like, I hated public speaking to start with, and I hated this. So it took a lot of practice. Like, when I first started, I'd rehearse 20, 30 times, and now I don't. Like, it's the same with like interviews like this. I won't read the questions. I'll have Kim, my personal assistant, will vet the questions to make sure I'm not going to get in trouble. But like, I worry if I rehearse, then the problem I have is that, like, if I'm working to a script and somebody asks a question I'm not expecting, or I fumble, I lose it. So I have to go completely ad lib improv, right? But that's once again where the knowledge stuff comes in. If I know the pitch, I know the team, I know the IP, then I can do it as I'm going. But yeah, I think you just have to sell yourself and sell the idea properly. Like, that's where the appeal is. Like, if you've got a gimmick, great. Like, if you are, our gimmick now, I guess, is like the 2D stuff, right? Like, it's a lot easier for me to pitch for a 2D title than it is for a 3D title, because we're the 2D studio, all the hand-drawn stuff we do. So it's knowing that, just having a deep dive knowledge of you, your team, and the IP. And then, I think the opportunity is the good thing there. It's not about market viability. It's about how ready the market is. It's about, like, I always try to avoid games where I can when I'm pitching a game. It is that stuff like, hey, look at this blockbuster movie. Look at this. Like, there is an audience that exists here that isn't necessarily being catered for. And you could go spend 50 million on a game, and you could do it with a AAA house who, will probably have a percentage of their team that love the IP. Or you could spend a fraction of that money, quicker turnaround, with a team who really love this IP. And, that is what we'll give you. We'll give you this unbridled, passionate creativity. And so, like I said, it's not going to work every time. My failure rate is much higher than my success rate. But great thing about this industry is, like, one success can last you 2-3 years. So, even if my batting average is absolutely awful, as long as I keep going up there and taking a swing, I'm hopefully going to keep winning deals home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things you spoke about earlier is, kind of where the industry was in regards to licensed IP when you first started thinking about it in 2012, and some of the kind of negative connotations around it. I think it's really cool now that there are so many opportunities in licensed IP. It's not just AAA studios anymore who get the opportunity to work with it on a movie release or whatever it is. And I guess one of the things we see is a lot of smaller studios who they might not have even a title in market, much less a one that's IP based. And but one of the things they do have is, like, they have this really awesome team. It might be like they've just launched this studio. They're really keen to work with licensed IP. I think you've kind of already given some good advice here because you're an indie studio yourselves, but, like, what would be some of your advice to a small studio who's just looking to get into licensed IP as a type of game to create?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think first thing is, think, what IP do you love? First question you ask yourself and your team. What IP do you love that you could spend years living in, right? And make a list. Just make a list and go wild, right? Because at first you sit there and you go, I'd kind of like to do this or that. But I think once you actually sit down with a bit of paper, like, oh God, like, I've had those lists have been 20 IPs long, right? And also remember that IP doesn't just mean a film or a TV show. It can mean a book. It can mean an old title in games, right? Like, Battletoads wasn't a established media IP. It was this game I loved in the 90s. So make that list and then, like, try and figure out who owns those. 90% of the time, I'm not going to lie to you, it's probably Disney. Like, it's going to probably be Disney because they own so many of the big IPs now, right? But, like, figure that out and then look at who else is doing anything with this IP? Like, for instance, pitching Wolverine right now is not a great idea because we know Insomniac's making a Wolverine game. Unless you can bring something very different to the table, right? Like, very, very different. Or if you're pitching on something where there's been a title in the last 5 years, how are you separating yourself from that title? And then, just take a gamble. Like, you need to reach out. Make sure you've got an awesome idea that works for it. We've been through that. We've been through my 3 awesome points. But like, start trying to find a way in to have those conversations. And that is really hard to start with. Like, go to expos, go to develop, go to DICE if you can. Like, that's where you'll need to spend the little amount of money you have when you're a startup. It is the networking side of things. And yeah, like, it's always swing for the stars, right? Like, but if you're just starting, it's going to be very hard to go out there and get Star Wars, right? Like, let's be honest, it's going to be very hard to start up and instantly go for Star Wars, especially if you're a small startup who has not got a track record. Let's be honest, like, we got Mickey by fluke in 2015, absolute fluke. If we'd actively gone for it 6 months earlier, 6 months later, probably wouldn't have happened, right? It was just time, place, coincidence. But like, figure out your different tiers of stuff. Like, have your Star Wars and your Mickeys on that list at the top, right? But what's the stuff below that? What's the stuff that's a little bit more quirky? Is there a comic book you really love? Like, and what is your motivation? Are you trying to get an IP that you license, you pay a license fee for, you pay an MG for, or are you trying to find something where you'll get paid to make the game, like paid up front, like, and that you'll soon start narrowing down your list almost naturally by doing all of that. But all that matters is that the thing you're pitching on is something you think you could do a better job on than anyone else, and make sure you
and
make that clear.
I think it's a really good point too around like the tiers, right? Because I think, you know, you might get fixated on a specific IP, but not realize that like there's multiple other IPs that you might actually love that are in the same genre or the same theme that are still going to like, you still enjoy them. You can still create a similar kind of game with similar mechanics, right? So I think it's a really good point. You don't have to shoot for the stars, but you know, you should also kind of have a tiered list.
Yeah. And we do, right? 10 years down the line, we've still got a tiered list where we're kind of like, this is the stuff that, like, I mean, Mickey was top of that list, you know, after 2016 and it all went away, we never thought it would happen, but it still stayed there. But yeah, like, we still have a tiered list of like, oh my God, like this, how fun would this thing be? Like, we could do a quick little 18, 24 month turnaround on this thing. And then we've got the stuff where it's like, oh, like 4 years, we want a 4 years big title. This is the thing where it's like, takes us to the top of this new AA kind of breakdown for studio. So yeah, like, and we still think about that to this day. But everything on that list, you know, it's that old thing where you don't pitch something you don't want someone to say yes to. Don't just pad out your list. Like, only pitch something you want to do, and that's kind of what our list is.
What's the flip here? I guess, you know, what do you see going wrong most often, or like, you know, what do you think studios do that potentially aren't exposed to licensing or haven't done this as much? Like, or even what did you get wrong the first few times? Is it reaching for stuff that's out of your reach, or is it having the expectations wrong, or leaning into it the wrong way and just kind of working with anything that's out there? Like, where do you think, you know, developers and studios can hurt themselves the most here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, and this is a conversation I've had, I think it's very hard to do damage that you can't come back from. Okay. Like, with the exception of being a bad person and being actively a bad person and rude, I think it's very hard. Like, a bad pitch doesn't tarnish you, because I've done bad pitches. Like, I've definitely done bad pitches. But yeah, I think where small studios go wrong, it's actually the question you asked me earlier. Where small studios go wrong is when they try and pitch to big IP holders how they're going to monetize their IP in ways outside of the game. Like, what could you imagine? Let's say Lucas. All right, let's go for Lucasfilm. Could you imagine if I went to Lucasfilm and I pitched them a Star Wars game, and one of my slides in that was telling them how I feel I'm going to drive revenue into their consumer products? Yeah. I think I'm going to sell Star Wars toys. They will look at me and be like, we're still paying royalties on Star Wars toys from 1970. Why are you telling me how you're like? And I think that's sometimes where small studios go wrong, because There's a lot of guides out there, and there's a lot of talks where people tell you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Show IP holders how you're going to drive revenue to the rest of their business. Okay, well, look, that's great if it's a small IP. If it is a independent comic who doesn't have an existing consumer product business, and you're telling them, we will help you create a consumer product business by driving a fan base to other areas, brilliant. But don't tell Lucas, Marvel, Disney, Warner Brothers, don't tell those people how you're going to drive money to other parts of their business. Also, don't try and be smarter than the other people in the room. Like, don't think because you are the game developer in the room of business people that you are the smartest person there, because let's be honest, most of them will eat us for breakfast. You know, most of them see 400 pitches a year and just go, no, thank you. Like, that's fine. We'll just stay over here and carry on making 8-figure passive revenue every month. Like, so it's just about being respectful of the people, respectful of the pitch, and, know your target audience. Who is it you are talking to? And I don't mean the game, it is the pitch. Who are you talking to? Do your research as well. Every time I go into a meeting and there's a new name, I look them up on LinkedIn, I look them up on Google. I'm like, okay, this is who I'm dealing with. This is how I need to make sure I present myself. So yeah, like I think where a lot of people go wrong with this pitching side of things is like going broad with the commercial, just trying to pitch to everything. It is pitching a game that doesn't feel achievable for that team. Like, the awesome idea, awesome team bit has to work together. Like, if you've just started, you're in year 2 of your development life as a studio, and you go in and you pitch to Marvel that you're going to make an MMO, they're going to look at you and go, how are 6-7 people going to make us an MMO? Like, this is a ridiculous pitch for you to be giving. And you can turn around and be like, oh, yeah, but we're going to upscale to 120. And they'll be like, so you want us to provide you our IP while you're upscaling at a rate of 150% every month? Like, so it's, it's knowing who you're talking to, knowing what you bring, and making sure you can do what, at least know you can figure out how to do it. I don't think I ever pitch anything I always know how I'm going to make, but I always have faith that the team will do it. Yeah. So I always pitch something I'm confident we will figure out how to make, which is what I did with Illusion Island. We'd never made a seamless world game with no loading, but I knew the team could do it. Like, I knew we'd figure it out. So I pitched that, and I was like, no idea how we're ever going to make this, but I could justify it. I could explain why this is the team that could pull this off.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, cool. I mean, I'm curious, just to finish on, where do you see the world of IP-based games going in the next few years?
I mean, IP stuff is awesome now, right? Like, oh my God, we got Spider-Man. Like, nothing else matters. That Spider-Man game, man, like, that changed everything. And let's be honest, like, Arkham walked so Spider-Man could run. Like, the Batman games, I think, were really... the Batman games, I think if we hadn't had those, I think we'd all not be making the stuff we're making. But Spider-Man suddenly turned around and went to the world like, hey, those blockbusters you see at the cinema, we can bring that home to you with the stuff you love. Because we've all clamoured for is a good Spider-Man game for years, right? We've had God knows how many Spider-Man games, and we've had, 1 or 2 good ones since the 90s? So I think IP stuff's really strong. And not just at that end of the spectrum. I think you've seen some really creative stuff, like the OK Go game by Cappy. Like, Cappy, a fantastic studio known for their original stuff. Out of nowhere, they do this license title, and it's brilliant, and it's so much fun. And I think that I'm hoping this is what we see. We see studios like Dlala and Biffle Games doing cool creative things with the IP at a smaller scale, and then we still have your Insomniacs and your Rocksteadies driving the bigger stuff as well. And what I hope and what I feel is going to happen is, as the people our size grow, we suddenly get a spectrum. We don't just get 2 ends. We don't just get, here's an indie IP title and here's a AAA title. We get, hey, like, look at this really cool thing that was made with an IP with 3 people. Look at this cool thing that was 50, 100, 1,000 people. And, like, that's really what I hope is going to happen over the next few years is, we're no longer making these cheap cash-ins. And I'm sure they still exist, but they don't really get the press anymore. You don't really hear about like this stuff. You hear about the cool games. And I think that what's really interesting, and I think what's exciting, is you think about the cool IP we've grown up with. Well, people that grew up with that stuff are my age and older now, and they run these studios, and they do bring that passion. Like, it isn't a bunch of studios just run by businessmen. It is a bunch of studios by comic book nerds. Like, you know, that's why we're seeing cool comic book games. And, you know, I think you look at what Rocksteady did with the Arkham stuff. Like, could you, like, I bet DC look at that stuff and go, man, I wish we could replicate that with the movies. Like, I wish we could replicate that rabid fan base who will go out and buy those titles. Yeah. Like, so yeah, I think what we're going to see with licensed stuff is this. We're going to see the spectrum expand and be a real spectrum, not just a binary. I think it's going to continue to get pushed. I think there'll be people that come in and try and do the cash grab thing and quickly fall out, because you could drop 100 million and it still won't be as good as that 30 million Spider-Man game. Like, that's like, that game is made on passion and power and creativity and talent, right? Like, you watch those GDC talks that team did, and they loved it. They loved making that game. They loved the IP. So I think we're going to be shielded, at least for a while, from the bad cash-in stuff. I think it'll just drop off very quickly. And what I hope is that, as well as these big IPs getting supported with cool creative titles, maybe we start seeing some independent IPs really benefiting off the back of it. It'd be wonderful to see some quirky comics and TV shows and films that maybe don't have 100 million profit a year that suddenly get a boom in audience because somebody loved their stuff and made a game out of it. So yeah, it's less of a crystal ball prediction and more just what my hope is. But yeah, that's really where I'd love to see the IP side of things go in the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a pretty good crystal ball, because some of that stuff, you know, the smaller IPs are kind of already getting some play, particularly in mobile. It's really cool to see, you know, you can find these kind of really niche audiences for some, you know, the non-AAA IP. So fingers crossed that Wolverine is just as good, and we'll have a happy AJ. Happy AJ for the next few years.
When have Insomniac ever done anything that isn't awesome?
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, AJ. Really appreciate all the insights. Great to chat.
Lovely chatting you.
And cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the Licensing and Games video series. For more content like this, subscribe to our channel or check us out at layerlicensing.com.